Test, test. You have to check the volume as we go. Good morning. Let's see, a couple of quick announcements. Cell phones, please address that. I actually had to leave mine on my desk because I realized in a panic, oh my gosh, I'm probably guilty as well. So turn off cell phones. If at any time you need to get up and go get more coffee, please do so. Let's see, two quick announcements. We have our tequila tasting coming up on Friday, May 10th. It's a wonderful event. This is not the tequila from our misspent youth in college. These are top shelf. They just give you a little sample. You really get to savor the flavors, learn about it. It's paired with a wonderful taco vendor that we have here, and a few restaurants are coming to serve foods. So if you're interested and you just want a fun party, there's going to be an art auction, a silent auction, some other things. Please join us. Second, I want to make an introduction. Most of you know me, and you know Vanessa, who gives our lectures every 3 months. She does one of them as well. She's our curator of art. And you probably know Brian, our curator of digital programming, who also does all the video and everything. If you want to go back and relive the lectures, Brian has set up a YouTube page for the museum. You can access it through the museum's website, and he's beginning to archive videos and lectures and things like that. And the introduction I want to make is there's another staff person that you should all meet. I'm putting you on the spot, Olivia. Please stand up. This is Olivia Osborne. She's our facility rentals and events coordinator, so tequila tasting, it's her fault. But also importantly, we all know people in families and friends who may be looking for a venue for a wedding, an anniversary celebration. If any of you need to look at the museum as a possible venue, Olivia's the person to talk to. So I just wanted to make sure you knew who she was as she's around and about the museum. So let's jump right into this. The last masterpiece, it's a novel about World War II, Italy, two women whose lives intertwine as they try to salvage art that has been stolen by the Nazis. No novel is going to be as good as the reality. The real story is truly amazing, and that's what we're going to look at today. Wow, I hope that's not bombers coming for the from the Nazis dealing with the lecture, just a lawnmower. So we're going to look at Europe Under Fire, the Nazi attempt to steal a cultural history. A couple of quotes. The Führer loves art because he himself is an artist. Under his blessed hand, a renaissance has begun. Joseph Goebbels. Anyone who paints a sky green and pastures blue ought to be sterilized. Adolf Hitler. I plan to plunder and to do it thoroughly. Hermann Goering. During a war, everybody loots a little. Hermann Goering at the Nuremberg jails. Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, the purpose of the people, Americans, that the freedom of the human spirit, poor spelling, and human mind, which has produced the world's great art, shall not be utterly destroyed. And then to show the devotion of the Americans. This was unusual. This never happened in a war before, where a country would say, we're going to war, but we are going to preserve the culture, preserve the art. General Dwight Eisenhower, inevitably in the path of around historical monuments, the responsibility of every commander to protect and respect these whenever possible. This had never been done before. Culture, art, architecture was all up for grabs in any conflict. Many of our great museums are built on the loot from past conflicts. And then the last quote, all things beautiful and mortal pass, but not art. Leonardo. So we're going to look at what happened during World War II because it truly was remarkable. And it begins with this man, the great curator. Oh, sure, you know of Adolf Hitler as the great demon of the 20th century, and indeed he was. But how many of you know that he fancied himself to be the greatest curator ever? Vanessa, you got a lot to live up to. Adolf Hitler was himself an artist. Here's a couple of his watercolor paintings. He was what I would call a very gifted amateur artist. He was rejected by the art academies. He applied to several. He was rejected in Vienna because his art was not speaking of the times. He wasn't really in league with the contemporary artists in his time, so he was overlooked. And he never forgot it. He always resented it, but he knew he was a good artist. And indeed, to look at these, very competent. Are they great art? Do they speak about the time in which he lived? No. But they're lovely. So he decided, as part of his plan to take over the world, that he would create the biggest art theft in history. This was an organized, orchestrated plan. Before the war, Adolf Hitler brought together many of Germany's leading historians and curators and collectors. And he gave them a mission: catalog the greatest works of art throughout the entire world. Where are they? And they formulated a plan to get them. Adolf Hitler's plan was to build a new city called Linz. And Linz was going to be the world's largest museum. The entire city was going to be buildings of museums. And this is his model of Linz. And all of the greatest artworks in the world were going to be brought to Linz, so that if you wanted to see something from our cultural history in the past, you only had to go to one city. It really wasn't for us. It was his megalomania. He wanted it for himself, but this was an orchestrated part of his plan. And it's obviously overlooked when you consider all of the other horrific things he was doing, the building up of his war machine, the Holocaust. Who looks at what was happening to the art? Well, there were some that looked. Hitler started out his plan by collecting what was, let's call it, low-hanging fruit. His officers confiscated all the art they could from the collectors in Germany, most of whom were bankers and Jewish, and they just took everything. Well, Hitler had to decide what to do with it. Masterpieces, of course. Painting by Leonardo, we're going to keep that. Painting by Vermeer, of course that's going to end up in Linz. But what do you do with the rest? Well, he decided that some of it just needed to go, needed to be destroyed. But you know what? Some people liked that art. And so he decided to put on an exhibition in Switzerland called the Degenerate Art Exhibition. And there he was going to show art of the degenerate artists. Van Gogh, Picasso. Oh, you know, the ones that were really just not good artists. And of course, all the artists that were accepted into the Vienna Art Academy when he was rejected, they were all part of it. And he put together this exhibition, and his curators did an interesting thing. This is Goebbels giving Hitler his tour through the show. and you see this writing on the walls, it would describe the artist. Things like, so-and-so deserves to rot in a sewer. Or this artist should die. Or the quote that I gave you about Van Gogh should be sterilized. It was a total propaganda hit piece. And all of these works were going to be destroyed or sold at auction. So what they did is they took these to Lucerne, Switzerland. And here's a Van Gogh piece, a very famous portrait by Van Gogh. And they put it up for auction. Everybody knew that these works were either going to sell or be destroyed. Hitler made no secret of that. He had already destroyed enough. Nobody doubted his word. But this presents a problem. Everybody also knew that the proceeds from this sale were going to fund his war machine. That was a given. So what do you do when you have a Van Gogh, a Monet, a Picasso up for sale? And it either needs to be purchased or it will be destroyed. This was a dilemma. And it was a huge controversy among museums throughout Europe and mostly in America. Do we contribute to Hitler's war machine or do we save the culture? A few museums said absolutely not. We will not participate in that. Too bad if we lose the art. Other museums, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Modern in New York, other museums throughout the country, Chicago, said we can't let this happen. And they went, and that painting exists now because they purchased it. There's no right or wrong to this answer, to this question, this dilemma. But that's where we stood before the war. Do we save art or do we not? The historians that were for saving the art made an approach to Roosevelt. And they said, we have to save the culture. And that's when Roosevelt and subsequently Dwight Eisenhower came on board and said, we will make every effort to save the art. Well, in the meantime, Hitler was still planning on taking everything. He hadn't invaded everybody yet. He did go to Italy, and in a tour with Mussolini, it was essentially a shopping spree. I say shopping, but nothing was purchased. Hitler would say, oh, I like that piece. Mussolini would order, box it up, crate it up, it's being sent to Germany. Here's Hitler and Mussolini looking at a beautiful sculpture by Canova in the Borghese. Hitler wanted it. Mussolini hated art. He didn't care. Take it. Plans. He wanted the discus thrower. Go ahead. We don't need it. It became a practice all throughout the war, leading up to it and then throughout. If anybody could get stolen art, a masterpiece, give it to Hitler for his birthday. That was the birthday gift. And here's Himmler giving Hitler a birthday gift of a masterpiece. Here's Goering giving a masterpiece to Hitler. Goering himself, one of the architects behind this great plan of art theft, he knew what he was talking about. Hitler may have had an incredibly narrow view of what great art was or was not. Goering, he knew. Goering was a connoisseur. He was a collector. He was a very gifted scholar, absolutely evil human being, but as an art historian, he was top notch. And so he knew what to take. And he himself collected art, and he always made sure that if he collected something and put it in his own villa or his own estate, that Hitler got 2 or 3 things that were better. And that allowed him to build his own collection of absolutely outstanding, outstanding artworks. Well, everybody knew war was coming. That was no secret. So how do you prepare? If your goal is to preserve the art, how do you make plans? Well, you hide it. You can't hide from a bomb. And everybody knew that Hitler had no problem. If his soldiers couldn't steal it, their orders were to destroy it. That was their standing order. You can't steal masterpieces from such and such a city, destroy the city. Scorched earth policy. So, what do you do with something like Van Dyck's equestrian portrait of Charles I, which stands 12 feet tall? Well, you pack it up, and because the tallest arch leading out of the city was still too short to allow the truck, you dig the road down, dig a ditch, so that the truck will be lower and you can just barely make it through with the painting. Where did they hide it? In salt mines and in copper mines, down in the earth. They hid everything. Churchill made sure that no artwork left England. They found tin mines, copper mines, and salt mines, and everything was secreted away, but nothing left England. So here we have Nike, a pretty big sculpture at the top of the stairwell in the Louvre. Here they are moving it down, emptying the Louvre out. And here's another painting, Raft of the Medusa, which had to be brought. Look how big this painting is. And they're carrying it through the streets to try to bring it out of the city. Here's a nice shot of the Louvre. That's how it looked in wartime. Just a big, empty building. Everything cleared out. What do you do with the cathedral? Paintings and sculptures can be moved. What about the stained glass windows? They were all removed and buried. Sometimes they would find large wells, and then they would bury it, and then they would seal it over and fill it with dirt so that it was impact proof. Rembrandt, the very famous Night Watch, that had to come out. They didn't have anywhere big enough to store that, so they rolled it up. They made its own little coffin crate. They rolled it up, and they hid it in I believe, a salt mine that had its own secret location. They completely camouflaged it so nobody could find it. The Mona Lisa? Oh, Hitler had a wish list. He had a wish list of what he wanted people to find. The two top paintings were a painting by Vermeer and the Mona Lisa. Those were the ones he wanted the most. The Mona Lisa, they were afraid to hide. They were afraid to put it in any one location. So what they did is they got a Red Cross van, and they made a false bottom in the back where they put the wounded, and in that false bottom they secreted the Mona Lisa. This was a working Red Cross van throughout the entire war, and where it would be wherever they felt the Nazis would not affect it. At the end of the war, people were wondering, what happened to the Mona Lisa? Because the people that knew were dead. And it wasn't until somebody who had driven the van at one part during the war said, I know where it is. And they tracked down the Red Cross van and saved the Mona Lisa. Wow. Yeah. What do you do with something that's too big to move? 17-foot tall marble sculpture. That's a hard thing to move. So where are you going to put it? You can't put that in a salt mine. Nope. You build a frame around it, and you start bricking around and filling it with sand. And this is what, leading into the gallery, you have the David, you have other Michelangelo sculptures, and this is what they looked like during the war. Everyone was entombed, filled with sand, so that they were essentially bomb-proof. Something even bigger, the tomb of Pope Julius II. Here's the tomb they built for that. What do you do with something like a fresco? Leonardo's Last Supper in Milan. Well, sure enough, they built the scaffolding, They sandbagged it, they filled it in, and they protected it. We have it today. In Russia, they didn't have quite the same resources as Europe had, but they wanted to preserve theirs as well. Here they are preserving Peter the Great, which was on a big monument, and you see they just built up dirt around it. They started building wood structures, and that's what it looked like. It worked. Wasn't as clean and fancy looking as that nice brickwork, but they did what they could to save their art. Like the Louvre, they emptied out the Hermitage, and there's all the empty frames still hanging there. You'll notice here a pile of sand with a shovel sticking out of it. That's their fire suppression system. They didn't have sprinkler systems and halon gas and everything else. If they got bombed, they would have to go in, and they had sand to try to put out the fires. Another piece that had to be protected. This has a little bit more history behind its need to be protected. In 1937, on April 26th, before the war, during the Spanish Civil War, Adolf Hitler loaned a contingent of his Luftwaffe to Franco in Spain. And Franco used that contingent of the Luftwaffe to bomb a city called Guernica. Guernica had no military value. There was nothing there. It was a mountain market town. It was a trial run. It was to send a message to the rebels in Spain, and it was a trial run for the Luftwaffe to see how well they could bomb Guernica. At 10 in the morning, a single plane flew overhead. Most of the people in Guernica had never seen an airplane. It was Monday was market day, so that everybody from the farms and vineyards all around would come into the market. It was the one day every week where everybody was there. The plane disappeared. At 10:30, a roar was heard on the horizon. It was wave after wave after wave of bomber jets or bomber planes of the Luftwaffe. They started by circling Guernica and using their machine guns. They strafed around the side to corral the entire city towards the center. The second wave were bombers dropping bombs right on the center of the village, the center of the town. The third wave dropped incendiary bombs, which burst into flames. And the fourth wave were machine guns to catch any stragglers that happened to make it out. A few days later, while sitting in a cafe in Paris, Pablo Picasso read the newspaper article, the first reports of the bombing of Guernica. Being a Spaniard, he was appalled. He was apolitical until that time, and he decided he needed to respond. His response to this devastation was this: a massive painting, Guernica, and here you have a woman screaming, holding a dead baby, another in a burning building, and a dead man, his arms outstretched, the mark of the stigmata across his palms, the Christ reference, very deliberate. Picasso worked on this for years, or for months rather, with thousands of preparatory drawings. It was his most serious piece to date. Hitler wanted this painting. He wanted this to destroy it. So this painting was hidden. It went to America. It was secretly sent to America to preserve it. At one point, a wonderful story, Pablo Picasso, this is him during those years, was in his studio in France, and Picasso was probably the most untouchable individual in France. Politicians, the Nazis could kill. Military people, the Nazis could kill. Pablo Picasso was a world treasure. And he was essentially untouchable. But they still went to harass him all the time. And at one time, the SS, the Gestapo went into his studio, and a captain at the Gestapo, I forget his name, they were pushing things about, and Picasso would just sit there and listen, knowing that they would eventually leave. And at one point, this captain in the Gestapo picked up a postcard that had Guernica printed on it. And everybody knew they were after Guernica. And the captain said to Picasso, "Did you do this?" And Picasso famously responded, "No, you did. Would you like me to sign it?" So being sent to America, we weren't immune here. We had to protect the artwork here as well. Not many people know this, but the great museums in the U.S. were emptied during the war. And a big portion of them were sent to the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, a multi-millionaire's estate which was commandeered for military use. And the reason they chose this in North Carolina was because they had a private railroad that led to it. So it made bringing things in, and then they would truck everything from the rail depot into the estate. And here they are, all these vans offloading the great masterpieces that were in the Smithsonian, the National Museum, Museum of Modern Art, etc. Quite an endeavor to hide everything, to protect it. And so this art was hidden in wells and caves, salt mines, copper mines, out of the way estates, anywhere they could hide it, because they understood this was part of the program. But then war really came. Everybody knew it would. And it starts in Poland. Hitler's armies invade Poland. No art they needed to save there. No, nothing in Poland. The Polish were degenerate. The Polish were dirty. Some of the rhetoric is painfully similar to what we hear today about unclean individuals invading. So they went to Poland with no attempt to capture the art. They went to Poland to destroy it. Well, that was a side issue. They went to Poland to defeat Poland, get things rolling. In the meantime, destroy the art. And here they are bombing the royal castle. And here's the royal castle as they're trying to put out some of the flames. This is an interesting picture from the royal castle after it had been bombed, but it was still standing. And so what the Nazis did is they went through and they drilled these holes in walls, the key load-bearing walls all throughout the castle. And they loaded them with dynamite. A little bit of a problem with this. Somebody had drilled the holes too large. And the dynamite kept sliding out. So they forced men from throughout Warsaw to each stand there, holding the dynamite in place, while their families, their wives and children and parents were held at gunpoint outside. And if they dropped their dynamite, their families would be killed. The palace was destroyed. Hitler was jubilant. Next step, Paris. Warsaw had nothing he wanted but Paris. Oh, Paris had plenty that he wanted, not just in a military sense, but remember, we're focusing on the art. There was a lot of art that he wanted. Here he is with the Eiffel Tower. He was very upset when his architects told him that it would be no simple feat to move the Eiffel Tower. He figured he would get it eventually. That was planned for Linz. He toured Paris. Here he is at Napoleon's tomb, which he called one of the greatest days of his life, to see his hero. And here he is at the tomb. Oh yes, that was going to move to Linz as well. Well, during the war, we saw how things had been protected. We saw how the Last Supper was being sealed up and entombed. Sure enough, the cathedral in Milan was bombed. The only wall left standing, that which held the Mona Lisa. That's why we have it today. And if you see the building where it now resides in, they've restructured the walls, but you can see that the fresco only touches a small part of it. The main fresco and a little bit on the sides that you see over here. Well, they started moving things around because, of course, the Allies weren't going to just sit still. They moved into England, they moved into France, they moved into Italy. They started the counteroffensives. And so the Nazis were moving everything. They hid a lot of their work at the Vatican. And the Vatican was afraid to defy the Nazis, so they allowed them to hide their works there, thinking that the Allies will never bomb the Vatican. Here they are retreating from several Tuscan villas as they were moving out of Italy. And here they are just stealing the artwork, not very carefully, just loading it onto trucks any way they could. If they can't take it, destroy it. Case in point, this is a bridge, Ponte Santa Trinita in Florence, Italy. It's a gorgeous bridge. It was an engineering marvel because Michelangelo designed it. You probably haven't seen too many bridges that Michelangelo designed. You probably haven't seen this bridge. Because when the Italian army and the Nazis had to leave this Florence in Italy because the Allies were coming in, they were under orders to destroy it. Not to deny access to the Allies. They had multiple ways to get in. They destroyed it because if Hitler can't have it, nobody can. Well, this led, and before this even, to the creation of a special unit in the U.S. military, the Monuments Men. Now, there was a movie some years back with George Clooney and Matt Damon and a few others, The Monuments Men, which was a fun movie, and it kind of broke my heart because it was one of those cases where, okay, you made an entertaining movie, but it so totally distorted the history that you don't, and the history is so much better, so much more exciting. So the Monuments Men, it was a contingent of art historians, architects, curators, essentially a group of middle-aged nerds who were given high ranks in the military. They were given special orders to preserve, protect, and recover art wherever it was in danger. And they took those orders seriously. They had the ability to go in when Allies were invading or moving into a city and countermand military leaders' orders and say, no, you're not going there, you're not bombing that until we go in and see what needs to be saved. And that led to some of these things, and out of bounds, off limits, don't touch anything. Souvenir hunting will be dealt with as military offenses. And indeed it was. We know that there was still a lot of looting, even by the Allies, the soldiers, small things they could take home. But for the most part, that was very much controlled. Here we have some of the Monuments Men, one soldier with a local, going into an area in Cherbourg as it was being bombed. And they went in and ordered the U.S., the Allies, to stop bombing in this area while they went in and saved some sculptures from a local church, cathedral. This is one of my favorite heroes, Frederick Hart. He was an art historian. If any of you took an Italian Renaissance art history course in university, After the survey courses, he wrote what is still the definitive textbook on Italian Renaissance art history. As a captain, he did some wonderful, enjoyable things. His life should be made into a movie. He was frustrated because he couldn't get around, so he stole a colonel's Jeep. There it is. When the colonel found out who had taken it, Frederick Hart just said, "But I need it more." And he was untouchable. He had orders from Eisenhower, you see. At one point, a general had ordered the bombing of a city. And Frederick Hart said, "No, this area of this city is off limits. You'll destroy a cathedral." The general didn't care. Frederick Hart flourished his orders, signed by General Eisenhower. The general on the site didn't care. So Frederick Hart pulled out his sidearm and pointed it at the general and ordered him to stand down. Frederick Hart won that battle. Yeah. This is one of the many places where the Nazis had set up camp, and so they started storing artwork there. Villa of Montegoffoni, outside of Florence. When the Allies got there, they found some nice little artworks that were secreted away, such as Primavera by Botticelli. How nice that that piece survived. And here's a soldier looking at it. There it is. We're so lucky to have that now. Here's the discovery of artworks that had been stored in a mine. No care taken because there was so much. How do you store that much art? They weren't going to build racks and store it archivally. It was just put it in there and hope that nobody finds it. The Allies were especially good. The monuments were exceptional at finding these mines because they found people and captured people who knew where they were. This is Merker's salt mine in Germany for the artworks that were shipped to Germany during the war. This is one of the sites where it went. What you're looking at is not artwork. This particular salt mine was where they kept a lot of valuables. Every one of those bags that you see goes all the way back. Thousands of these bags were all filled with gold. Let me be more specific. They were filled with gold extracted from teeth. This is the gold of the Holocaust. When the Allies, the monuments men, found Merker's mine, it was devastating. They also found art. Here's a painting by Monet, the Conservatory. Here it is. At the end of the war, after the surrender, Dwight Eisenhower, General Omar Bradley, and General George S. Patton were making a tour. They were showed Merker's mine. They were shown the gold from the teeth. They were shown the piles and piles of shoes that were taken from the Jews. They were shown the skin that was flayed from Jews because it had tattoos on it. And they must have some use for that. Later that day, they went to Auschwitz. There were still prisoners there because they were too ill to move, starving, dying, but the Allies were now in control. And then towards the end of the day, as if these two hits were not enough, Eisenhower received a telegram. Roosevelt had died. He said it was the worst day of his life. The paintings continued to be found. Paintings, sculptures. Everything was recovered that could be recovered, such as the Judgment of Paris by Lucas Cranach the Elder. Here's a very famous castle, Neuschwanstein in Germany. It's a fairy tale castle. Mad King Ludwig famously created this castle. It was used to store art. And here we have the Allies bringing down art, recovering it, bringing it down the stairs, the monuments men, that wonderful contingent of nerds that saved the day. Here's Berchtesgaden, Hitler's private retreat. That was used as a place to store art, and they were recovering everything. We all know that Hitler's last days were him hiding in a bunker, hoping that some miracle might happen, but he knew no miracle would happen. He had moved into the bunker his model of Linz. And we know from this photograph that many hours of his last days were spent with him studying his model of Linz, his dream that could have been, but would no longer be. He, of course, took his own life before the Allies could capture him. Well, what do you do with all that art that you found? Here's something else America did that was unheard of. The custom throughout all of history was if you capture the art, you take it home. What's the joke? Tell me something that seems British but isn't. The contents of the British Museum. Yeah. Because we just take everything. And not us, just us. We're all, the world has done this. But in World War II, we did something else that was remarkable. They formulated the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan was to put Europe back on its feet, to put Germany back on its feet, to put Japan back on its feet. Let's recover, let's heal the world. That was the plan. And part of the Marshall Plan was let's return culture to their lands of origin. And so the monuments stayed on. This contingent of architects, conservators, art historians, artists, they stayed on and they repaired the art. Every work of art that they recovered went through a conservation process, even if it was not damaged in the war, even if it was just something that was so old it needed a good cleaning and restoration. They restored everything, which is not an inexpensive prospect. And here they are, pieces that are collected. They have 5 collecting points where they essentially amassed all of the art that had been captured. Wow, this was the closest Hitler got to having his dream come true of all the art in one place. It was all in 5 places in Germany. Here's a room of sculptures that would eventually find its way back to churches and cathedrals and town halls throughout Europe. Here's one of the studies where conservation was occurring. And you see here a painting by Titian over here. And this wonderful desk, this table that they used, that was Hitler's private desk in his private office. They took great pleasure in using that as one of the areas where they would study and restore the art. They amassed the largest collection of art and art history books the world had ever seen. And when they were done, they donated the entire library to various museums throughout Europe. Just a nod to the librarians. And then it went home. Here's the lead truck entering Florence in July of 1945, and it was an entire caravan, and it was followed by more and more and more and more as they brought the artwork back into Italy, back into France. England, it was just recovering it from where it was because, as I said, Churchill would not allow anything to leave England, even to hide it. In fact, Churchill very famously put into the budget, in the wartime budget for England, for the nation that had to be approved by Parliament. He put into the budget a remarkable amount of funding to preserve, protect the arts. An amazing amount of money. And now this was a country that was in desperate need of money to fight the Nazis. And he was severely criticized. And one parliamentarian said, "How dare you put this in when we have young men dying?" And Churchill famously retorted, "If we're not willing to support culture, art, literature, and music, what are we fighting for?" That was an argument that Churchill won. The funding remained. Here we have the returning of Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine, getting one of the few works that was taken from Poland. It went back, and we have it today because the Allies found it. Rembrandt's Night Watch that we saw that had been rolled up in the coffin, it was a major international news story when it was put on a barge and sent up a canal. And there they are, the various dignitaries getting their photo op with the coffin that held the Night Watch. And it was eventually restretched outside of the gallery, and they had to break open the wall to put it back in and then rebuild the wall because they didn't feel they had a place inside big enough to do it. So it went home. The Mona Lisa, as I mentioned to you, somebody remembered. Good thing, or that might have ended up on a junk heap. There it is, being pulled out in safety. Russia, Prussia, Eastern Germany, they weren't so lucky. As the Nazis fled, they just dumped. They didn't have time to destroy anymore. They just literally threw it off of trucks, trains, whatever was handy. And we know that we had casualties of war in the art world. Just a few. A Caravaggio, St. Matthew and the Angel, we have a good photograph of it. Never been found. Peter Paul Rubens, Bacchanal, destroyed. I would say thousands, but the truth is it's hundreds of thousands of artworks have never seen the light of day since that war. What do we take from this? Those who fail to learn from history. This is the National Museum of Iraq. In the lead up to the bombing of Iraq, art historians, university professors, museum directors approached President Bush and pleaded with him, protect the art. You're going into a country that is the cradle of civilization. Protect the art. Works that can never be recovered. Protect the art. The art was not protected. Rumsfeld fought against it. He said, in a war, a little looting is expected. Does that quote sound familiar? So this is the National Museum of Iraq. And there it is. Everything was emptied out. Much of it destroyed, much of it looted. About a third of the works they have found since that time, still ongoing, about a third that was taken were actually taken by people to protect it. They rushed in during the bombing, took works out, and buried it in the desert. Those have been recovered. About a third of the works have been found and recovered because they were on the black market. And here we're talking about, again, thousands and thousands of works, and about a third of them are gone. After 3 days and pleading, please protect the museum, stop the looting, stop this from happening. A tank was situated right in front of the museum to deter looters. Nothing was posted in the back of the museum, and the looting just continued openly. Those who fail to learn from history are destined to repeat it. This is the Ukraine. Sandbagging art to protect it from bombing. Once again, curators, museum directors, art historians went to the president and said, we need to help these people. We need to help them to protect their culture. This is the Ukraine. A few artworks were salvaged from a bombed out church. When asked if he would protect NATO countries if invaded by Russia, Trump said, quote, "No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want." What did Russia want? They didn't care about the art, per se. This is the current tally of cultural and art devastation in the Ukraine. More than 343 major cultural sites have been destroyed. 38 museums containing more than 1,500,000 artworks have been destroyed. 480,000 artworks we know of have been taken from the Ukraine by Russia. And it continues. We had a shining moment. In World War II, we took the world's cultural history and made it our responsibility. How I wish we could do that again. Thank you all for coming. See you next month.
You didn't mention that we saved